All right, thank you, Mark. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular meeting of the Alexander Board of Education for January. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and Aaron, if you would do the roll call, please.
Mrs. Edis? Mr. Regan?
Here.
Mr. Barnes?
Here.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
And Mr. Davis?
Yes.
All right, everyone would please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, I would entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Seconded.
Mrs. Edis? Yes. Mr. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Okay, number 4, this is public participation for any items on the agenda. Is there anyone that would like to speak regarding agenda items? No? Okay. Moving on to item 5, the budget hearing. It's recommended that the Board of Education approve the enclosed 2022 fiscal year tax budget for submission to the Athens County Auditor by January 15th, 2021.
And just a reminder, for just like last year, this is the first step in the budget process for next fiscal year. This is what gives the county auditor the authority to set the rates for the district. We can't raise anyone's taxes through the tax budget or anything like that. It's just the procedural step in the budgetary process. So,
And this has to be done by Friday. That's why we have the January board meeting
it's
a week early.
exactly, it's required by statute to be submitted by Friday.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Mrs. Edis?
Yes.
Mr. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Okay, item 6, reorganization. We need to elect officers for the upcoming 2021 year. I would like to open, was it Aaron, open the floor for nominations? Is that good?
I nominate Jay Barnes as president and Lucy Udis as vice president.
I also have a nomination, but it's different. Do we go in order of the time or what?
No, this is the time for anyone to make whatever nominations they want to make. So,
I would like to nominate Blake as president and Jay as vice president.
Who was
Okay.
that? I didn't hear.
hold on a second. So, Fred, you nominated Jay as president and Lucy vice president.
Yes.
And then Lucy, who did you nominate?
Blake as president and Jay as vice president.
Blake as president and Jay as vice president. Is there any other nominations? Do you want to, does someone want to make a motion to close nominations?
Just for the sake of understanding, how does this go?
What we'll do first is we're going to close the nominations once everyone's nominations are finished being made, and then we will take the roll call vote for each position based on the nominations that were made, one at a time.
So we'll be going by position rather than slate, which I believe slate's what we've done
can't
before.
hear
Sorry,
you.
I couldn't hear you.
So we go by position is what you're saying, rather than slate, and I think in the past we've done slate.
Mhm.
Okay.
Do we need to second any of those nominations right now, just officially?
No. What will happen is a nomination doesn't require a second. What will happen is I will make it clear to you guys whom you're casting your your yes vote for, and I will take the roll. You'll each cast either a yes or a no vote for the first candidate for that office, and then I'll go to the second candidate. We'll do the same thing, roll call, and then you'll cast a yes or a no vote for that person for that office.
Okay.
And since we have two different nominees for both positions, we'll do them one at a time. It's not like a presidential election where it's a
The whole thing, yeah.
yeah, it's just, we have two different nominations for two different positions, so we'll do them one at a time.
Okay.
I'll motion to close the nomination.
Yeah, we got Jay and Blake for president as two nominations, and Lucy and Jay for vice president.
I'll make a
But
mo-
now I'm looking for a motion to close the
I'll motion to
nomination.
close the nomination process.
Okay. Do we have a second for that?
Second.
Okay, this is a roll to close the nominations. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Okay, we'll do president first. The first nominee was Jay Barnes. I will take the roll, cast a yes or no vote for Jay Barnes as president. Mrs. Udis,
And because there's two people, we have to choose one or the other, right? We can't do both yeses or both nos? Are they independent votes?
you theoretically, you could vote yes for both candidates. I'm not sure how that would work if
It's fine.
both
I'm
candidates
fine.
get,
Ignore that.
okay.
No.
Mr. Regan,
No.
Mr. Barnes,
I'll abstain.
Mr. Collins.
Wow, my mind is currently being baked. We're in the position where, so the first one, no matter what Fred or I do, is done. Correct? Am I reading that right, Aaron?
It does require 3 affirmatives.
Hmm. You've seen these wheels turn before, haven't you? So I will, what I've been accused of before, politely say no by abstaining, because I think both are viable. And I don't know how this is going to play out, because I have a feeling we're not going to have a 3 yeses as soon as the next round comes and somebody abstains.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
okay, and we'll move on to the second nomination for president, which was Blake. So I'll take the roll. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
I'm going to say no, but we've all talked. It's no surprise. There's been a lot of chatter between all of us up here. I told Blake my issues. I'm not going to state them publicly, but the answer is no.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
No.
Okay. Mr. Regan has been elected as the president of the board. And now we'll move on to vice president. The first nomination was for Mrs. Udis. So we'll take the roll for Mrs. Udis as vice president. And Mrs. Udis.
Yes.
Mr. Regan.
Yes.
Mr. Barnes.
I'll abstain.
Mr. Collins.
No.
And Mr. Davis.
No.
Okay, so now we'll move on to the second nominee for vice president, which is Mr. Barnes. So we are taking the roll for Mr. Barnes as vice president. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
I'm still abstaining.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
So Mr. Barnes is elected vice president. So at this point, Blake, you would take over the remainder of the meeting.
So for item B, we have the appointment of member of board as legislative liaison. We have item B, appointment of member of board as legislative liaison for 2021.
I'll nominate Josh Collins.
Do I need to, we don't need to second it, do we?
Um,
No, never mind.
No. So I'll take the roll to appoint Josh as the legislative liaison. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Sure.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item C, we have the appointment of student achievement liaison for 2021.
I'll nominate Lucy Edis.
Okay. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item D, we have the determination of day and time for regular meetings. Does anybody object to keeping it as the third Wednesday, 7 PM?
I'm good.
Yes.
I'm with it.
Good.
I'll make the motion if we need it.
Seconded.
Okay, this is for the third Wednesday of the month, right? And at 7 PM. Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item E, we have the adoption of the following resolution. We have, be it resolved that in the event that the treasurer's absence from a meeting of the Board of Education, the board will choose one of its members to serve as the treasurer pro tempore for the duration of the meeting.
Moved.
Seconded?
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item F, we have the adoption of the following standing authorizations for 2021, and we need
You don't have
each
to
one?
read, you don't have to read those if you don't.
Then I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
All right, for treasurer's items, we have, it's recommended for A, it's recommended that the board approve the minutes of the December 16th, 2020 regular meeting.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
For item B, it's recommended that the Board of Education approve the financial report for the month ending in December 31, 2020.
Moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item C, it is recommended that the Board of Education approve the following transfers, and these are monthly standard transfers.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
For superintendent recommendations, it's recommended the Board of Education approve the enclosed substitute aide and teacher list as recommended by the Athens Megs ESC superintendent.
So moved.
Second.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item B, it's recommended that the Board of Education approve the enclosed request for early graduation from Billy Brand pending his meeting all requirements.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes, and
Mr. Barnes?
congratulations.
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item C, it's recommended that the Board of Education grant unpaid leaves of absence to the following: Dave Hawk and Megan McElligott.
Moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item D, it is recommended the Board of Education employ the following as home instruction tutors for the 2020-21 school year.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item E is recommended the Board of Education employ Stephanie Elmore as a substitute custodian effective January 11th, 2021.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item F, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the annual membership in the Ohio School Board Association for 2021 at a cost of $5,269.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item G, it is recommended the Board of Education approve the enclosed resolution regarding board members' participation and attendance at OSBA-sponsored conferences, workshops, and conventions.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Business initiated by board members. Board reports. Public participation. So the next meeting would be February 17th, 7 PM. Any run-ins? And that time, I guess, make a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mrs. Udis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.